What I will say is that there were, during the 1970s, mostly actually 60s starting, a lot of Catholic priests who were living in poor neighborhoods in cities throughout the kind of the region, right? So whether it was Caracas, whether it was Lima, whether it was Mexico City, had been trained in what was happening in the Catholic Church in Europe, which was a kind of progressive turn of the church. So it turned towards kind of social sciences, to kind of thinking about workers as having collective rights, right, to promoting kind of socialist policies. And in fact, there's a lot of movements, Christians for socialism during that period. And there is a lot of influence. A lot of people would argue during that period, a lot of kind of young priests would say Jesus was a socialist, right, that he wanted everybody to have kind of enough and not anybody to have too much. Certainly nobody to lack what they needed. And so in places like El Salvador, there was a boom in what comes to be called liberation theology. And these are leftist priests who oftentimes are seen as allies of, or even some became allies, and one even became in Colombia a guerrilla fighter for these liberation armies, these leftist, mostly Cuban-inspired liberation armies. And some of these priests get wrapped up in the kind of crossfire, or caught in the crossfire, between the US, who's still covertly trying to keep all the leftists out of power, and these guerrilla fighters who are trying to achieve political power in El Salvador or in any of these countries really at the time. There was freedom fighters fighting from a leftist model, most not successfully. And the United States was supporting, in most cases, the kind of right-wing powers that be. And so that's, I don't know if that, it's a complicated question, but the Catholic Church itself remained very conservative throughout this period. It was these kind of progressive, mostly young, left-leaning priests who kind of stood with the people, stood with their cause, and gave them a moral and ethical kind of push that maybe had, these groups maybe wouldn't have been as successful as they had been if they didn't have a Catholic priest saying, yes, you're doing God's, work to provide water and education to the people in the slum. And so that's kind of how the Catholic Church get caught between. And in the 1980s, under Pope John Paul II, there's a huge backlash on these liberation theologians, these leftist priests. Many of them, a few of them are excommunicated. Many of them are kind of removed from their posts. And there's a kind of turn towards the right internationally within the Catholic Church in the 80s and 90s.